Sai Ram from Prashanti Nilayam. Dear listeners, Radio Sai continues its weekly presentation of the talking book version of Mr. Howard Murphet's highly acclaimed book, Sai Baba, Man of Miracles. The author was among the very early Westerners who came to Satya Sai Baba as a skeptic in 1964, and drawn by his enigma, he stayed for considerable periods of time near him in the next 6 years. During this period, he conducted extensive research and probing investigations into the Sai phenomena. He published his findings as the book that has become a classic of Sai literature, often considered the primer which introduced Sri Satya Sai Baba to millions round the world. This book was first published in 1971. Since then, it has been instrumental in drawing millions of seekers to the loving path of Satya Sai. These readings, dear listeners, are being aired every week, and if you wish to revisit a chapter at any time, you can do so at our website radiosai.org. So dear listeners, welcome now to Sai Baba, Man of Miracles by Howard Murphet.
Sai Ram, and welcome to this talking book session of excerpts from Mr. Howard Murphet's book, Sai Baba, Man of Miracles. We are now at chapters 3 and 4. The first two chapters were featured in the previous episode, which you can listen to by keying in the words Man of Miracles in our archive page at www.radiosai.org. Chapter 3 is entitled Abode of Peace and Many Wonders, which starts off with a quote from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri. Quote, "This earth alone is not our teacher and nurse. The powers of all the worlds have entrance here." Unquote. So far, we heard how Mr. Murphet's mind played the devil's advocate, not allowing him to wholeheartedly surrender to Bhagwan's divinity. Today, we will listen to his initial set of experiences in Prashanti Nilayam, experiences which form the foundation of this book and reflect the many facets of our dear Lord Sai. In Chapter 3 entitled Abode of Peace and Many Wonders, Mr. Howard Murphet explains.
My first visit to the Abode of Peace of Prashanti Nilayam was alone. My wife Iris was not able to get away from her duties at the Theosophical Society headquarters. On reaching the ashram, I was, as per instructions from Baba, given a room which was much better than I had been led to expect or dared to hope for. It was in a small guest house and was well furnished, with its own private washroom and a flush toilet. One of the first people I met at the ashram was Mr. N. Kasturi, a retired history professor and college principal of Mysore University. He was now the secretary of the ashram, editor of its monthly magazine Sanatana Sarathi, and the writer of a book on Sai Baba's life. He had also translated into English many of Baba's public discourses, which had been delivered in Telugu. These, published in several volumes, contain the miracle man's spiritual teachings and give an idea of his mission and message. On my first morning, Mr. Kasturi arrived at the guest house with copies of all the books which had been printed in English. "They are a present to you from Baba," he explained. Mr. Kasturi is not only a scholar, but a deeply religious man whose face glows with the devotion and benevolence. The ashram also has its own canteen where I had been invited to have my meals, but I was told that as I was Baba's guest, I must not pay. The accommodation was also free, and I had been given a set of free books. It seemed I was not allowed to pay for anything. But perhaps I could make a donation at the end of my stay, as one does at most ashrams in India. This point I queried with Mr. Kasturi. No, he said emphatically, Baba will not accept donations. He never takes money from anyone. He seems to have some wealthy followers, I replied. Perhaps they give financial help to the ashram. No, Mr. Kasturi smiled. But don't take my word for it, ask them yourself. Many will be arriving in the next few days for Shivratri. What's that? I queried. He explained that it was the great annual festival to the god Shiva, that many thousands came to Prashanti Nilayam for it, and that during the festival, Baba always performed 2 great miracles in public. I decided then and there to wait for the festival of Shivratri, Shiva's night, and see the miracles. In the meantime, I would read Sai Baba's story as written by N. Kasturi, talk to his followers, and get close to the great man himself whenever I possibly could.
Over the next few days, Mr. Murphet was blessed with an interview from Swami. Swami played the role of a patient teacher and helped the author overcome the many doubts that lay buried in his mind.
During the next few days, in fact, I was fortunate in being invited to several group interviews. For these, a dozen people gather in one of the interview rooms at either end of the bhajan hall or prayer hall as it is sometimes called. On each occasion, I managed to get as close as possible to him and sat to his right within a couple of feet of the hand that performs the magic. These group interviews usually begin with some talk on spiritual subjects. Baba invites someone to ask a question, then in the answer he expounds on such matters as the meaning and purpose of life, man's true nature, and the way he should strive to live in order to reach the goal. The teachings are always clear, vivid, and intensely practical. Towards the end of each meeting, if some people have personal problems, he may take them into another room, one by one, or in family groups. But never a meeting went by without Baba producing at least one item besides the vibhuti he always produces, with his theurgic hand-wave, pendants, chains, rings, necklaces, and other objects. I have watched him pluck from the air in this way and then give it to some delighted individual. He apparently knew my suspicion of him was not yet dispelled, because he still pulled his loose cuffless sleeve up before taking an object from nowhere. But on one occasion, he did not need to raise the sleeve above suspicion. It was a very hot day, and he was wearing a robe with short sleeves that came only to the elbow. Now, as he would exorcise once and for all the skeptical spirit within me, he let his right hand lie open, palm upward, on this arm of the chair within a few inches of my eyes. If I had been a palmist, I might have read the lines and mounds on the small palm and slim, graceful fingers. I could certainly be quite sure that no items, however small, were concealed there. Then he lifted his hand from where it lay and began to circle it in the air about 18 inches from my face. One moment, the hand was empty. The next, it was holding something big that protruded brightly on either side of his fist. He shook this out to reveal a long necklace of colored stones. It was what the Indians call a japamala, which, like the Christian rosary, is used for prayers. Its regulation size is 108 stones or beads. There was nowhere in three-dimensional space that a conjurer would have hidden such a bulky object and produced it under these circumstances. Baba gave it to a grey-haired lady on his immediate left. When he placed it around her neck, she was so overcome that her eyes filled with tears, and she went down on her knees to touch his feet.
Recounting his encounter with the devotees in the ashram at that time, Mr. Murphet writes that Bhagwan's followers were from all parts of India and from all classes of society: princes, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, judges, civil servants, scientists, soldiers, clerks, and tradesmen.
Filling the guest house there were, in the ladies' suite, the Maharani of Sandur, her daughter, and Nanda, Princess of Kutch. Among the men were the Kumar Raja, Prince of Venkatagiri, the Kumar Raja of Sandur, Mr. G. Venkateshwara Rao, the mica magnate, and myself. These people were all quite rich, so remembering Mr. Kasturi's challenge, I questioned them as well as other wealthy followers about money donations to Sai Baba. From all of them, and later from many others, I had the same answer. They would, they said, love to help support Baba's ashram with funds, but he would never accept any money from them. Nor did he take any donations from anyone they knew. How then does he get the money he needs? To this question, they smile, as if to say, how does Baba do anything? He is a mystery we can't solve. Anyway, it soon became quite clear that whatever the motive for his miracles, it was not money.
Mr. Murphet was soon to find out that Bhagwan's miracles were not restrained to the mere production of ash. He was also the divine doctor, who had through mysterious ways cured devotees of ailments that the medical community had long given up. Through interactions with Dr. B. Sitaramaya, who was the medical superintendent in the small hospital in the ashram, Mr. Murphet heard innumerable accounts of the mysterious healing powers of Bhagwan. Here are the few experiences as recounted by the author himself.
A woman devotee from Bangalore was suffering from tuberculosis. There was bleeding and X-rays showed a cavity of the right lung. Medical opinion was that the disease was probably curable, but that effective treatment would take about 2 years. Instead of undergoing the prescribed treatment, she came to Prashanti Nilayam. Sai Baba gave her vibhuti from his hand, and she was put in the hospital. About a week later, when I visited the hospital myself, she was still there convalescing. But all symptoms of the tuberculosis had gone, the doctors assured me. She had been cured in a week instead of 2 years. A young man living in Bombay but recently returned from Switzerland was suffering from internal trouble, which doctors in both Europe and Bombay had diagnosed as cancer. He was not a devotee of Sai Baba, but a friend had urged him to go to Prashanti Nilayam. In desperation, he went and stayed, not in the hospital, but in a building near the canteen. There he waited and prayed to Baba for help. One night he had a dream in which someone visited him carrying a shining knife. When he awoke, that was all he could remember. He told Dr. Sitaramaya and others the vague visitor and the clear bright knife. Perhaps it was not really a dream. To the canteen manager who took him breakfast in the morning, he showed a large mysterious blood stain on his sheet. Had Baba performed an operation while he slept? Such strange things had been known before. Anyway, all signs and symptoms of the cancer had vanished. It was about a year after this experience that I wrote to the young man to inquire if the cancer cure had been complete. His reply came from Switzerland, where he had returned to his job. He was in sound health, and not a day passed, he said, in which he did not think of Sai Baba and offer a heartfelt prayer of gratitude for his miraculous cure.
In the months ahead, Mr. Murphet met many people who had themselves experienced dramatic and miraculous cures of serious, sometimes deadly diseases. A good proportion of these were well-known leading citizens of their communities, who permitted him to use their names. Chapter 4. This brings us to the next chapter entitled, O World Invisible. It starts off with a quote from Francis Thompson, who said, quote, O world invisible, we view thee. O world invisible, we touch thee. Unquote. Here in Chapter 4, Mr. Murphet notes that in the chronicles of miraculous phenomena, there was nothing quite like shower of unlimited vibhuti from a small urn that was typical of the Shivratri celebrations in those days. Let us now listen to Mr. Murphet's diary entry of the Vibhuti Abhishekam of Shirdi Sai idol performed by Bhagwan Baba.
Now, Sai Baba thrusts his arm as far as the elbow into the vessel and makes a churning motion with his arm as women did when making butter in the old days. Immediately the ash begins to flow again from the vessel and continues to do so in a copious stream until he takes his arm out. Then the flow of ash stops. Next he puts his other arm in and twirls that around. The ash streams out over the statue again. This process goes on, Baba using alternate arms, ash pouring from the empty vessel while his hand is in it, and stopping immediately, he takes it out. Finally, Shirdi Sai is buried in a great mound of ash, much more than the vessel could possibly have held. Now the urn is placed on the floor, the miraculous ceremonial ash bath is over. There is a joyous, elevated atmosphere all around. Mr. Kasturi's face is more radiant than ever. Baba's movements and manner are the acme of self-conscious grace. It's all wonderful, yet having watched him pull handfuls of ash out of the empty air, I am not so greatly surprised to see him stir it in large quantities from an empty pot.
But the big climax of the day was yet to come. The author had heard various accounts of the Shiva lingams that had materialized in Baba's body at this sacred period. He had heard that Baba usually ejects the lingams through his mouth for all to observe. They are always hard, being made of crystal clear or colored stone, and sometimes of metals, such as gold or silver.
Are you sure he does not pop them in his mouth just before he goes on stage, and then eject them again at the right moment? I asked. My hearers looked at me with amusement and pity. One of them said, he talks and sings for a long time before the lingam comes out, and it's always much too big to hold in the mouth while speaking. Last year, it was so large that he had to use his fingers to pull it out through his lips, and it stretched them so that the sides of his mouth bled. Another added, there were 9 one year. Each was about 1.5 inches in height. Imagine holding all those in your mouth while you talk for nearly an hour. Well, I thought, even if he does bring these things up from somewhere inside him, what is the point of it? Certainly, it's a most miraculous phenomenon, but has it any significance? What is a Shivalingam anyway?
At this juncture, the author goes on to share his understanding of the significance of the Shivalingam with the readers, noting that it is based on the wisdom of Dr. I.K. Taimni of the Theosophical Society School of Wisdom at Advar, Madras.
The Shivalingam belongs to the class of natural Hindu symbols, which are usually mathematical in form. Such symbols are called natural because they not only represent a reality, but to some extent are the actual vehicles of the power within that reality. The lingam is an ellipsoid. It symbolizes Shiva Shakti, that is, the primary polarity principle of positive and negative forces. On this principle of opposites, the whole universe is founded. Why is an ellipsoid used to symbolize the polarity principle? Dr. Taimni explains it in this way. The ultimate reality, the absolute, or Brahman, or God, or whatever we care to term it, has no polarity, no pairs of opposites. All principles are balanced and harmonized within it. Therefore, the ultimate reality is represented by the most perfect mathematical figure, the sphere. If the center, or the one focal point of the sphere, divides itself into 2, we get the ellipsoid. So this figure gives a symbolic representation of the primary pair of opposites out of the original harmonious one. And from this first duality comes all manifestation, all creation, and all the multiplicity of things in the universe. The lingam is therefore the basic form lying at the root of all creation, as Om is the basic sound. To put the matter in Hindu terms, from the one Brahman emerges Shiva Shakti, the father and mother of all that is. We must note in this connection that Shiva is not only an aspect of the triune Godhead, the destruction-regeneration aspect, he is also the highest God, the father of all gods, the cosmic logos. Like all the gods of Hindu thought, Shiva has his consort Shakti or female aspect, and whereas the male or positive aspect represents consciousness, the female or negative aspect symbolizes power. Both are necessary for creation or manifestation in the planes of matter. It is significant too that the ellipsoidal or lingam form, which symbolizes the Shiva-Shakti principle, plays a fundamental part in the structure and working of the universe. It lies, for instance, at the base of all matter within the atom, where the electrons apparently move in elliptical courses around the central nucleus. Again, at the solar level, we find the planets describing not circular but elliptical orbits around the sun. The lingam has a more profound and significant connotation. The word itself in Sanskrit simply means a symbol or emblem, which in itself suggests that it is a basic primary symbol. In fact, representing in concrete form the fundamental principle and power of creation, it is considered the highest object of worship on the physical plane, and as it has a true mathematical relationship to the reality it symbolizes, it can bring the worshippers en rapport with that reality. Just how it does this, Dr. Taimani points out, is a mystery which can only be resolved and understood by one's inner realization.
Coming back to what was to take place in Puttaparthi on that auspicious day, Mr. Murphet recounts his enthrallment, notwithstanding the skepticism of the events that unfolded in front of him that day.
At 6 o'clock, Sai Baba, accompanied by a small group of disciples, came into the Shanti Vedika, and soon after that the speeches began. It was about 8:30, powerful electric lights illuminating the group on the platform, when Sai Baba rose to his feet. First, he sang a sacred song in his sweet, celestial voice that touches the heart. Then he began his discourse, speaking as always on such public occasions in the Telugu tongue. The 30,000 or so people were as one, expectant and utterly silent, except when Baba told a funny story or made a joke. Then a ripple of laughter would pass over the starlit field of faces. Sai Baba's eloquence had been flowing in a steady stream for some half hour when suddenly his voice broke. He tried again, but only a husky squeak came. Bhajan leaders among the devotees, knowing what was happening, immediately gave voice to a well-known holy song, and then the great crowd joined in. Baba sat down and drank from a flask of water. Several times he tried to sing, but it was impossible. Now he began to show signs of real pain. He twisted and turned, placed his hand on his chest, buried his head in his hands, plucked at his hair. Then he sipped some water and tried to smile reassuringly at the crowd. The singing continued fervently, as if to support and help Baba through this period of pain. Some men around me were weeping unashamedly, and I myself felt a flow of tenderness towards the man suffering there before us. I could not grasp the full significance of the event that caused the agony, nor perhaps could most of the great crowd watching him. But to understand a thing with the mind is one matter, and to feel its meaning in the bones and blood is another. Inwardly, I felt that I was sitting at the very heart of something profoundly significant to mankind. But another cautious, rational part of me was not even convinced that a genuine miracle would indeed take place, let alone a spiritually important one. So, instead of blurring my eyes with the tears of sympathy, I kept them fixed on Baba's mouth. My whole attention was glued to that point so that I could not miss the exit of the lingam, if in fact it would come from there. After about 20 minutes or so of watching Baba's mouth while he writhed and smiled and made attempts to sing, I was rewarded. I saw a flash of green light shoot from his mouth, and with it an object which he caught in his hands, cupped below. Immediately he held the object high between the thumb and forefinger so that all could see it. A breath of profound joy passed through the crowd. It was a beautiful green lingam, and certainly much bigger than any ordinary man could bring up through his throat. Sai Baba placed it on the top of a large torch so that the light shone through its glowing emerald-like translucency. Then, leaving it there, he retired from the scene. On the significance of the night-long vigil that devotees usually take up on Shivratri, Shiva is the god of yogis, the one who helps man to conquer his lower nature and rise above it into his true divine nature. To make this transition, the mind must first be mastered. Mind is said to be somehow related to the moon, and it is believed that there is an astronomically favorable time when the moon is right for success in man's efforts to transcend his mind. It is at this most favorable time in February that the great Shivratri is held. But at Prashanti Nilayam, this lunar festival is doubly auspicious. Not only are the celestial conditions correct, but the miraculously produced physical symbol of Shiva is there before all eyes, a glowing focus for the supreme effort of meditation. It is interesting and appropriate to note here that in the Uttara Gita, Lord Krishna says that the lingam is from the word lina, which means to unite. This is because the lingam makes possible the union of the lower self with the higher self and with God, with Jivatma and Paramatma.
In an interview that the author got a few days after Shivratri, Swami gave him an opportunity to examine the lingam at close quarters. After all the devotees present had a good look at the lingam, Swami spoke to Mr. Murphet.
Turning to me, Swami asked in a teasing manner, "If I give you something, you will probably lose it." "No, Baba, no, I won't," I protested. Pulling up his sleeve, he stirred the air with his hand about on a level with my eyes. I could see under as well as over it, yet I saw nothing there until he turned the hand up and a large shining ring had appeared in his palm. It seemed to be of silver and gold, but he told me later that the silvery-looking metal was Panchaloha, the sacred alloy of which many temple idols are made. Fascinated, I held out my hand for the gift, but he laughed and passed it in the opposite direction. It went around the circle, each person inspecting it, most of them holding it reverently to their foreheads, before passing it on. When it had returned to Baba, he placed it on my third finger. It fitted exactly. I felt quite overwhelmed, and even more so when I saw that the figure embossed in gold on the Panchaloha was Sai Baba of Shirdi. I had never told Satya Sai or any of his followers about my deep affection for that old saint. Was it then something that he could read in my mind? Soon after that, he began taking us separately into another room so that we could ask him private questions. When my turn came, he talked to me about my personal life and health. He seemed to be not only father and mother, but the very essence of parenthood itself, the archetype of all fathers and mothers. It was as if a warm beam of love came from him and entered into the depth of my being, melting my very bones. This, I felt, must be the pure high love that has no hidden selfish motive, the love that is simply a spontaneous expression of the highest, the divinity in man.
So, by and large, towards the end of his first visit to the abode of great peace, Mr. Murphet began to understand that, whatever the Sai Baba might be, he was not just a clever conjurer, nor was he a street magician with a limited repertoire of psychic tricks for extracting a few rupees from the passing crowd. Sai Baba, the author writes, did not belong to either of these well-known categories. What was he then? That remained a deep mystery, perhaps unfathomable, but anyway a challenge. With this, we come to the end of today's presentation. Till we meet again with the next episode, wishing you the very best and Jai Sai Ram.